Now, let's talk about some of the uses of the subjunctive mood. And for this, I'm just going to follow what the book has to say here. On page 127 in your book, it talks about the subjunctive mood and state, or it talks about different things: exhortation, let us, may he, wish, possibility. We talked about that already. Talks about the present subjunctive there in the middle of page 127. We talked about that already. So this main clause subjunctive, you have main clause, and we're going to talk about dependent clause subjunctive too. The main clause subjunctive is used for just the things that I told you before. It's used for exhorting somebody, encouraging them. That's what exhort means. When you say, let us run the race. Let us run the race. Well, run, of course, it's going to be corramos. Let us run the race. Cursum. A cursum is a race. Corramos cursum. Let us run the race. This third conjugation, so clem steams clams. There you are, amos. It's used for blessing. For blessing. May you rise to the heights. May you rise to the heights. May you, so that'd be, and rise is sur. Surgo, surgere, so it's third conjugation, surgas, to the heights. We could heights altitudines. Surgas altitudines, may you rise to the heights, surgas. So that's a blessing. A curse, may you lose. That kind of thing if you're cursing your competitors. So it's used, the main clause subjunctive is used for exhorting people to do things. It's used for blessings. It's used for curses. It's used for wishes. Would that you could do this. It's used for deliberation. What am I supposed to do? What should I do? Quid faciam. Here's a good one. What should I do? It's a deliberative question. We're deliberating. What should I do? Quid faciam. Faciam is going to be a third IO, which looks like a fourth, as you know. So it's going to have that a Miami combination, the combination there. Present subjunctive. What should I do? Quid faciam. Where should I go? Let's say, quid eam. Well, not what should I go, where should I go? Ubi, eam. Eam, ayas, ayas. Where should I go? Quid eam. Where should I run? Ubi kuram. Right here, kuram. So the main clause subjunctive is used a lot like English. It's used for wishing, blessing, cursing, exhorting, and deliberating. Deliberative questions, they call them. Okay? Now, after this, we're going to get into subordinate clause subjunctives. Subordinate clause subjunctives. And you'll see in the course that we have a little Irish prayer there, maybe the rose bride to greet you, where it uses all those subjunctives, and you'll see that in the lesson plan there coming up, probably around St. Patrick's Day. Okay, so that's in the top of page 127. They're talking about main clause subjunctive. We already went over the imperfect subjunctive in the middle of page 129, but right now I'm going to talk about sequence of tenses. This is a long chapter, or a long lesson here, because I'm combining several chapters when I talk about this. I have a nice chart of the sequence of tenses in your files to download on the course outline. And of course, that would probably be under a subjunctive heading. And I also have a nice chart in the PowerPoint presentations for the sequence of tenses in red, white, and blue and that kind of thing. Here's what the sequence of tenses is. If I have a main clause here and a dependent clause here, and the dependent clause is going to be subjunctive, then it needs to follow the sequence of tenses. Now, you don't need to make this up. You just need to recognize that this has occurred. That when the Romans are using these subjunctive dependent clauses, and I'm going to show you the like indirect question, for example, or purpose, very common result clauses, uses of cum, uses of well, cum and dum, that kind of thing, you're going to have the subjunctive in a dependent clause. You could have a subjunctive in a main clause too. We've already seen that. But here's what happens with the sequence. We have nothing like this. Excuse me. We have nothing like this in English. What I'm going to do is draw a line down here, and I'm going to draw a line over here and make a chart so that you can see what's going on. And then as you see examples in the book, you will start seeing what sequence of tenses is all about. Let this sink in. You don't have to understand it completely right now. Let it just sink in as you see examples of this. Okay, if you in the main clause, if you over here, if you have a present tense, if you have a future tense, like a future indicative or a future perfect, okay, in this is your main clause, then you're going primary sequence. There's primary and there's secondary sequence. And again, if you're a little confused right now, that's okay. This is something that's going to sink in over time. So, in primary sequence, in your main clause, you're going to have present, future, and future perfect. I will give you examples of this. But right now, just sort of look at this and see what's coming up against you visually. Okay, a lot of us learn by seeing, some of us learn by hearing, some of us learn by doing. So this is more or less looking at this and listening to me. Your dependent clause. I'm going to put a line down here, and I'm going to put incomplete and complete here. And that refers to the action of the verb. If your main clause is present, future, or future perfect, and the dependent clause has its incomplete action, it's not over with yet, it's going to be present subjunctive here. That's what it has to be. If it's a completed action, then it's going to be perfect subjunctive here. If it's a completed action. All right? Okay, you really need to see an example of this, and we'll get to that in a little while. And we'll let the Romans do it, actually. You don't have to make up the sequence. Just recognize that there it is. All the Romans follow the sequence of tenses. But this is what you're going to see this mentioned, not only in this Latin book, but any Latin book about sequence of tenses. And I just want you to be prepared. Secondary sequence occurs when in the main clause you have a past tense, like the imperfect, the pluperfect, and the perfect. Okay? Any three of those past tenses, the imperfect, pluperfect, perfect, in this dependent clause, if it's incomplete action, you're going to end up with an imperfect subjunctive. This is a very common circumstance here where you have imperfect subjunctive. We have the infinitive with the aristur or the MST. And if it's a complete action, you're going to have the pluperfect subjunctive. You'll see that in usage. So, this is your sequence of tenses chart. It's not the most beautiful chart I've ever done, but you'll see some very nice charts of this in my PowerPoint presentations and in files to download on the course site. Just look for sequence of tenses, and you will see a chart similar to this that explains what's going on when you have a main clause and a dependent clause. That is either a complex sentence, okay, compound complex sentence, where you have a main clause and a dependent clause. Okay, so there's your sequence of tenses there. Now, that's alluded to in page 129. They'll bring it up again in other pages. But there's the complete thing. You really can't say anything more about the sequence of tenses than what you see in this chart right here. Okay? So let me erase this now, and I'll talk about this again when we get back to it. I just need to give you some samples now of some of the uses of the subjunctive in dependent clauses. Okay, if you turn then to indirect command, well, let me hold off on indirect command because it's really not dealing with the subjunctive. I'll come back to that in another video segment. Sequence of tenses, again, is mentioned on page 131. So as long as they're doing that, and they're using ut clauses there, let me talk about the clauses of purpose. Actually, go back to page 128, and we're going to do purpose clause. Purpose clauses. This is the most common use of the subjunctive in dependent clauses. Okay? And my favorite example of this is I eat in order to live. I eat so that I may live. I eat to live. Can we all agree that those three sentences mean the same thing in English? In Latin, we have one way of saying those three sentences. One way. And it's not with an infinitive. It is not with an infinitive. Here's what, actually, we have a word in order to or so that, and that word is ut. U-T. It does not mean University of Texas. It means ut. In order that, and the negative, if you'd like to say, I eat so that I can't live, maybe you're poisoning yourself, is going to be nay. We get the word negative from that. The no ut is nay, and then you have ut. They even have an ut known with result clauses of purpose. We'll get to that. But right now, ut and nay. Nay is the negative of ut. Okay? How do we put this in Latin? I eat. Simply edo. If you look it up in the dictionary, eat, edo. Is it edible? Well, there it is, edo. In order that, so that, ut. Now, this has to be in subjunctive because when you have an ut clause, the verb within that ut clause is in the subjunctive. Are you getting to see this now? So, I may live has to be subjunctive. Now, according to our sequence of tenses, we're in primary sequence because this is a present tense. So if you look at your chart, if you made one, the sequence of tenses chart, primary sequence. Now, have you finished living yet? No, so it's incomplete action, so you're going to have a present subjunctive. So this is going to be the verb to live, we will, we were rate. We weesus. Not weesus, but we will. We will. So that would be V-I-V-A-M. It's third conjugation, clem steams clams. So there you are, edo ut vivam. And it follows the sequence of tenses, doesn't it? Primary sequence, present subjunctive because it's incomplete action. There it is. That's what that sequence of tense thing was all about. So now you've learned not only an example of sequence of tenses, but you've also learned about purpose clauses. Now let's say you didn't want to live for some reason. You had it. Then this would be changed to nay, meaning I eat so that I may not live. Maybe you're eating too much. Okay? Edo ne vivam, I eat so that I may not live. That's how they say it in Latin. Okay? So there's your purpose clauses, and that's explained at the bottom of page 128 in your book, and that's just a simple example of any purpose clause that they can come up with in Latin. All right. They talk about the imperfect subjunctive at the middle of page 129. We've been over that. We'll get back with the indirect command on page 131. We'll talk about this. We already have talked about the sequence of tenses, and they give you several examples there in the middle of page 131. The pluperfect subjunctive we covered at the bottom of page 132. The passive forms of the subjunctive on page 133 at the bottom we have covered. And deponent verbs we'll cover in another lesson, another chapter. The infinitives we will cover, and imperatives we will cover in another chapter. Ablative absolute we'll cover in another chapter. The future participle, indirect questions. Indirect questions, chapter 39 on page 143. This is another use of the subjunctive. So I can erase purpose clauses here. I can erase this, and I can erase all of this. And let me talk about indirect. What's a direct question? Well, let's put one up here. Direct question. And those of you following along, this is the explanation of the subjunctive. So I'm reaching into several chapters, and right now we're on chapter 39 on page 143. Chapter 39, page 143. A direct question, who are you? That is a direct question. Let's make it indirect. We're just doing this in English now. We have these in English. I don't know. What you did. course, the direct question would be, what did you do? What did you do? I'm always asking my doggies that. What did you do? I see a puddle on the floor. And I can say indirectly, excuse me, I made a mistake here. I need to erase the question mark because this is not a direct question. It's an indirect question, so it gets a period in English and in Latin. I don't know what you did. Who are you? Now, in Latin, who are you? Quis est tu. There's no subjunctive here. There's no need for one. You're not deliberating anything. It's just a simple direct question. Who are you? Quis est tu. All right? I don't know what you did. We can find, this is an indirect question. This has to be subjunctive. This is my point. When you use the subjunctive mood, all indirect questions in Latin, you have an interrogative word here. What follows it is going to be in the subjunctive. Here we go with sequences. You have a present tense here. I don't know. And that in English, or excuse me, Latin is nescio. Could you also be ignoro? We'll use nescio. What? Quid is. Quid is the interrogative for what? I don't know what you did. This is going to be a completed action, isn't it? So it has to be perfect subjunctive. Look at the sequence of tenses. You're in primary sequence because you have a present tense here. You have a completed action. You already did it. It is completed. So we're going to take the word to do, which is facio, facere, feci, factum, and we're going to put it into the perfect subjunctive. On your chart there, it's perfect subjunctive for completed action. So FEC is the perfect stem. And how do we make the perfect subjunctive? Erim, eris, erit. Eris. Feceris. There it is. You don't have to do this. As I told you, you have to recognize that you have an indirect question here. Nescio quid feceris. That is not indicative. That is subjunctive. If that were indicative, it would be fecisti. But it's perfect subjunctive. So there's the uses of subjunctive in a dependent clause, and it's called the indirect question. And you have several more of these. Let me point them out now. We covered the perfect subjunctive in the bottom of page 143. Sequence of tenses, we looked at that at the top of page 144. There are some miscellaneous Latin phrases in common use today at the bottom of page 145. Very important phrases. I would know those for your final exam in May. I'm continuing. Indirect statement we'll be going over in another lesson. And I'm just looking for more examples of this. Consecutive or result clauses on chapter 43, page 153. Result clauses. Result clauses. Folks, we're getting to the end of the subjunctive, so hang in there. This is a long lesson, I know it, but it's a big item. So let me erase this. This was indirect question, and now we're moving on to chapter 43, which is result clauses. Result clauses. Result clauses are a lot like purpose clauses. Remember we used ut? Ut? Well, this also uses ut. But the negative is ut non rather than ne. Just remember that for result clauses only. Okay? Result clauses take the subjunctive. Now, let me give you a result clause in English. He was so tall that, and what's understood as a result? That as a result, he could touch the roof. He was so tall that he could touch the roof. This here needs to be subjunctive. He could touch the roof. Let's take could out of there because I might be complicating things because you're going to have to use an irregular verb. Let's say he was so tall that he touched the roof. Just use the verb to touch. And there's the period there. You can recognize a result clause because of a word like this. So. Such. It was such a great storm. He was so tall. That's going to create a result clause here. So you look for this little clue right here. If you're going to take the National Latin exam for Latin 2, you will see this on the National Latin exam very definitely. So what does this look like in Latin, this result clause? Okay, and of course remember our negative is going to be, let's say he couldn't touch the ceiling. It would be ut non, but he could. He was is erat, right? Eram, eras, erat. There's no reason for a subjunctive here. And the word for so is tam, T-A-M, and altus, it's a he. He was so tall, ut, that as a result he touched. He touched. This has to be subjunctive. Now the verb to touch is tango, tangere. You ever hear of a tangent? Something that touches in geometry is tangent. Okay, so tango, tangere, tetigi. So this would be teti, and their tetig is the perfect stem. If I look that up, tetigi, take off the I. And what do we need here? This is secondary sequence because we have a past tense here. And did he touch the ceiling already? Yes, he did. So this is a completed action in secondary sequence. So we're going to have isem, isses, isset, tetigiset. He touched the roof, and the word for roof is tectum. It's a neuter noun of the second declension, tectum. You ever hear the word protect? That comes from that, protect. So, erat tam altus ut tetigiset tectum. He was so tall that, as a result, he touched the ceiling. Or not the ceiling, but the roof. Okay? So here you are. Erat tam altus ut tetigiset tectum. And that takes care of our explanation on result clauses. The important thing to remember, folks, is that when you see a little word like tam or tantus, meaning so great, that's your tip-off that you've got a result clause coming. That's the operative word, if you like. That's your tip-off that you've got that coming. So there's your result clauses. They even have the word taught, T-O-T, so many. It was so many days that he fell asleep. Okay? To such an extent. He was sick to such an extent that he needed to call the doctor. Okay. Then conditional clauses on page 155. Conditional clauses. If clauses. That's your condition. Okay. Erase this. Conditional clauses are in the subjunctive in Latin. Conditional. Not far to go, folks. Don't go to sleep. Conditional clauses, this is the big if. And it equals C. Not C like in, well, it's C like in Spanish. In Spanish, if it's C without an accent, it means if. If you have an accent on it, then it means yes. So the word C means if in Spanish without the accent. It does in Latin also. Since Spanish is 100% derived from Latin, why not? Okay, you have a simple fact. Simple conditions. Simple fact. If it rains, you'll get wet. That kind of thing. It says in here, if you say this, you are wrong. If you did this, you were foolish. So if you have, excuse me, if you have a simple condition on which the truth depends, then it's going to be in, let's say, it says these are clauses introduced by C, which a state or condition on which the truth of the main clause depends. So simple, in these sentences, you would have the indicative, okay, as you do here. So if it's a simple fact, you're back in the indicative again. I'm talking about the bottom of page 155. If you say this, you are wrong. If you did this, you were foolish. Those are statements of fact. And so that would be in the indicative, a simple condition, a simple fact. Now, contrary to fact is number 2 at the top of page 156. If our Father were here, he would be helping us. But he isn't here. So this is called contrary to fact condition. And which means it's in the subjunctive. So simple conditions are indicative, and they will already be that way, so you don't have to worry about putting them. But contrary to fact is put into the subjunctive because it's hypothetical. right? Hasn't happened. So if you had scored a 100, you would have won the prize. Okay, but you didn't. You scored a 62. So that's contrary to fact. Those kinds of conditions are are put into the subjunctive there, and it tells you exactly what is going on here. It says the imperfect subjunctive is used to present time and the pluperfect subjunctive to past time in both clauses, in the if clause and in the following clause. That's easy enough to understand. Then future conditionals, it says there's future more vivid, future less vivid. Future more vivid, if you come back home, I will tell you everything. Less vivid, if you were to return home, I should tell you everything. That's called a should-would condition. And again, it's in the subjunctive. It says the present subjunctive is used in both the C clause and the main clause. Your C clause is the dependent clause. So in your future less vivid, as the book calls it at the bottom of page 156, the condition, both clauses, is in the present subjunctive, and in the future more vivid, they call it here, if you come back home, I will tell you everything. It says, with the indicative, you have often met these. Notice that Latin uses the future, or more often the future perfect, in the C clause. English appears to. So, if you come back home, si domum reveneris, I will tell you everything. Omnia tibi narrabo. That they're using the indicative there. Future more vivid with the indicative, because that's a statement of fact. If you do, I will. Okay, no doubt about it. So there you are. Back up above it says where the contrary to fact conditional clauses are on page 156. The form of the sentence suggests that the main clause is untrue. That's the contrary to fact. If you had scored 100. In this case, Latin uses the subjunctive in both the conditional and main clauses. English uses the conditional tense in the main clause. And it says the imperfect subjunctive is used for present time, the pluperfect subjunctive to past time. And they give you 4 examples that if you were wise, you would not be doing this. If they had hurried, they would have arrived in time. Unless you had been imprudent, you would now be safe. Unless you had been imprudent, you would now be safe. So these are examples of all. So when you get to if clauses, realize that the subjunctive may come into play here. Again, let the Romans use it. Okay, and just a few more things here. Uses of subjunctive and main clauses, I've been over that at the top of page 158. We went over that earlier in like deliberative questions. What should I do? What are we to do? Would that we could, utinam, would that we wouldn't fall in danger. Wishes clause. And chapter 46 is a review chapter. Chapter 47, the uses of cum. And cum, unless it means when, is used with the subjunctive. And you can see all the uses on page 162, and there's uses on page 163 for dum. Dum meaning while. So dum meaning while, and cum when it means something since, something although, and they have labels for all this, is in the subjunctive. And that's easy enough to understand there on page 162 and 163. And those are the uses of the subjunctives that we will cover for our Latin 2 class here. So I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to come back and cover things I have not covered, like indirect statement, like deponent verbs, that kind of thing. So, but this covers the complete subjunctive in one big chunk. And I went into several chapters, right from chapter 34 up to 47, explaining this. Okay? Gratias tibi vobis, discipuli.